Welcome to Aspects of Writing, a show with a writer in mind. I'm your host, James Kelly, and for the next 60 minutes, my co-host, Janet Corsi, and I will strive to inspire, enlighten, and encourage new writers, as well as to showcase seasoned authors as we discuss the various aspects of the writing industry, including such topics as how to create, format, and even sell your work. So let's get right. Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. My co-hosts for today's show are Janet Corsi and Stephen Murray, along with guest authors S.H. Montgomery, or we'll call her Sue, and Gregory A. Kompes. Is it Kompes?
Kompes.
Kompes. Okay. The topic of today's show is writers groups, good or bad. And we always like to start the show with a few fun quotes. So I'm going to start off with Jan. Jan, would you like to start, please?
Oh, I sure would. If Moses were alive today, he'd come down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments and spend the next 5 years trying to get them published.
All right.
Anonymous.
And Stephen.
Okay, mine's a fact. Publishing houses routinely buy 1,000 or more international standard book numbers, commonly known as ISBNs. They are come at greatly reduced rates of $1 or less per ISBN. Bowker's cost of ISBNs to independent authors can be as high as $125 for a single ISBN or $250 for a pack of 10. This is based on the fact that Bowker must manage and service a myriad of new comparatively tiny accounts in the still young era of digital self-publishing. The original ISBN system was designed to manage far fewer accounts, each representing a full publishing house.
I don't know how much experience you guys have had with Bowker, but for instance, for me, I started off in 1995. I actually purchased I think it was 100 for just a few dollars.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think I got the pack of 10. I think it was $250. I can't remember now.
Yeah, that's where I was too, $250, and I've just bought my second 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have 100 if anyone needs them. And Sue?
According to Bowker, the U.S. Agency for the Administration of ISBN, there were at least 625,327 self-published books in the United States in 2015. Amazon's Create Space leads the way with 423,718 ISBNs, an increase of 1,087% since 2010. Regarding ebooks, Smashwords holds the top output position with 97,198 ISBNs for 2015, an increase of 725% since 2010.
And I think everybody understands what this means to the market. Like now, we have an average of about 300 books a day being published. So, that's what we're up against as self-published authors.
Right.
All right. And Gregory?
Well, I was sorry to hear my name mentioned as one of the great authors, although no one has done that yet, because there's a sad habit of them dying off. Chaucer's dead, Milton's dead, Shakespeare, Virginia Woolf is dead. I'm not feeling very well myself at the moment, so we'll see.
Okay.
That's actually a quote from Mark Twain.
Right. If you are just tuning in, you are listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly. My co-hosts for today's show are Janet Corsi and Stephen Murray, and our guests are S.H. Montgomery and Gregory A. Kompes. Again, the topic of the show is writers groups, good or bad. Our first guest is S.H. Montgomery. We will call her Sue. She is the author of Whispers in the Blood and the sequel Honor in the Blood. She grew up in a small town in the Texas Panhandle, but lived for 30 years in Chicago before relocating to Las Vegas, Nevada in 2003. She has 2 children and a sister who lives in Glasgow, Scotland, and a niece living in Barcelona, Spain. Montgomery is an avid collector of, how do you say that, Sue?
Ethnographic
artifacts, mainly from the Oceania and African area. She is you're a former assistant to a co-writer of screenwriter, right?
Correct.
But you're also working on children's stories with the same screenwriter. Okay. And S.H. Montgomery majored in journalism at Texas Tech University. She took creative writing at Northwestern University and Columbia College in Chicago, and has written freelance travel features for weekly and daily newspapers. Sue, what else are you doing in the writing arena?
Well, I finished 2 novels,
Okay.
Whisper in the Blood and its sequel, Honor in the Blood, which just came out this last March. In between writing those two books, I started a book, kind of a romance set in Texas, which I know more about than I did for the two novels that did come out. And I'm also writing with a friend a series of 10 children's books, picture books that rhyme for 3- and 5-year-olds.
Okay. All right.
Wow. Sue, how long have you been writing?
Well, I started writing in grade school, but if you want to know how long it took me to write my first book, I started that in Chicago when I was first taking creative writing. And I got about 6 chapters done, and then the course quit, and I quit because life became too much, I guess. It got in the way of my writing. So I put the manuscript on the back burner, and I didn't pick it up again for probably 5 years when I moved to Las Vegas and became a member of a writing group, and I picked it up and read it and realized it needed to be written all over again. So I started rewriting it, and the group went their merry way. They weren't really serious writers. So finally, about 7 years ago, or maybe more than probably 9, found another group. We were all serious, and I finally finished the book. So I would say from the first word to the end, it probably took 15 to 20 years to get it in book form.
So that makes you an overnight success.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
More ways than one.
Sue, you mentioned you've written children's books and a contemporary romance, and your 2 published novels, Whisper in the Blood and Honor in the Blood, they set out in the beginning of the 20th century. You're obviously multi-genre. What made your first book? What was your choice for having it be a period piece?
Well, when I moved to Chicago, I had lots of Irish and Italian friends, and I learned that they did not get along. And I heard lots of stories, and I just decided that it would make a good book. So I felt like it needed to be, the characters needed to come over, immigrating from their original country. So that meant I had to start with the early 20th century in around 1910.
Okay. All right. Our next guest is Gregory A. Kompes, and Gregory has authored a dozen books that range from gay contemporary fiction to poetry, gay nonfiction to metaphysical nonfiction. He has contributed to over a dozen anthologies, including Chicken Soup for the Soul, What I Learned from the Dog, and Chicken Soup for the Soul, Touched by an Angel. Gregory has written hundreds of published articles on a wide range of topics. He is the former president of the Henderson Writers Group, which is the host of an annual Las Vegas Writers Conference. Mr. Kompes teaches writing at Nevada State College, and as an artist in resident teaches a popular fiction series under the Nevada Arts Council National Endowment for the Arts grant for the James L. Gibson Library in Henderson, Nevada. Gregory holds a BA in English Literature from Columbia University, New York, and a Bachelor of Medical Science and Metaphysics from Sedona University, a certificate in online teaching and learning, and a Master's of Science in Education from California State University, East Bay, and a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from National University. How many universities did I miss there?
No, they're all there. You got them. You got them.
Gosh, now the question is, how many books have you written?
I think it's 14 that have been published, and there's probably 3 or 4 currently in the works. I usually am working on 2 or 3 projects at the same time, and sometimes something gets pushed to the back burner a little bit while I'm waiting. I have a murder mystery about a guy who finds a pair of severed hands that I just haven't been able to finish. So it's sitting in the back. But so there's always something being worked on. But it's 14, I think, published. Yeah.
That's magnificent.
Wow. Gosh, you seem to have written a diverse range of subjects too, Greg. Where do your ideas for the books you've written come from?
things I'm interested in general. Things come across my life or my computer, or I hear a conversation. For the nonfiction, it's sort of compiling those ideas. The fiction, it's a character comes to me. All of my novels are character driven, and I believe in that very much. Plot is important, but I think if you have a character who is empathetic or sympathetic, readers enjoy that more.
Yes.
And so it's when a character comes to me and says, you need to write this story, and they become real for me. It's an experience similar to the way Dickens, not that I'm comparing myself to Dickens, but it's the same way he found characters would come to him, and he had a mirror next to his desk, and he would look in the mirror and see the characters looking back at him. It's just the way he worked from a sort of metaphysical standpoint. And I do the same thing. I fall in love with my characters, and then I write their book. And I think that may be why the Severed Hand novel, the mystery novel, I know the plot, but I don't know the character very well yet. And that could be why that's waiting, do you know?
It'll come to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope so. It's a good story, so I hope
Well,
so.
Gregory, who or what was the greatest influence in your life when it comes to both getting the degrees that you have and the drive to write so many books?
Well, there are a lot of mentors. I believe in mentors. I mentor others, and I've been mentored by some great people. The true drive came, I think, in middle school when, for us it was junior high, now it's called middle. One of the teachers said you'd never be a writer. And,
Oh, wow.
And that was because I was a horrible speller, and this is pre-computer. And then computers came along, and I got to realize that I could play with writing. But I waited 20-some years.
Yeah.
But I worked for a very smart man named Len Ellis in New York City, and it was because of him that I felt encouraged to go back to school. And I had dropped out of college the first time around to be a musician, and I traveled the world, and that was great. And then Len said, you need to finish your degree. So I had an opportunity to go to Columbia University as an adult, which is a very different experience than
Yes.
as a 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And that was the start. That was the impetus. And then when we moved to Las Vegas, I was taking an online course, the very beginning of online education. And Eva Shaw was a huge influence. She taught still does, through Ed2Go. She teaches some great inspirational online courses, and she helped me actually get my first nonfiction book contract.
Oh, wow.
And if I have a question or a problem all these years later, I email Eva and ask for help, and she's so generous. We brought her into the Las Vegas Writers Conference, I don't know, 3 or 4 times now, too. She's so generous. So those are 2 of them. There are lots of others, but those are 2.
Well, now that you mentioned it, are your books self-published, or do you have a traditional publisher, or?
I'm a little bit of everything. I've been traditionally published, which is a really cool experience to have. And I've indie published several works because I like to see how the industry works. So I like to keep my hands in things. I've also been a publisher, co-publisher with Tina Thompson, and we published a series of anthologies. So we got to publish other people as well.
Okay.
So a little bit of everything, you know.
Well, if you're just tuning in, my name is James Kelly, and I'm the host of Aspects of Writing. My co-hosts for today's show are Janet Coursey and Stephen Murray. Our guests are S.H. Montgomery and Gregory A. Kompes. I'll get it right here.
That's okay.
The topic of today's show is writers groups, good or bad. Stephen, would you like to take the first quote?
Oh, absolutely. Be happy to. Pros and cons of writing groups. An article written on July 29, 2015 by Lily Iona Mackenzie, being part of an online writing group for several years has provided many benefits. However, with the positives come a few negatives. According to Ms. Mackenzie, the positives are, and I quote, over a period of time, one learns to recognize each reader's style of critiquing and approach to writing fiction or non-fiction. I've discovered that usually all of our critiques collectively add up to one excellent response. Each person brings a different angle, a new take on the material. Some focus on character development more than story arc. Others seek deeper meanings in the piece and how they are revealed by imagery, metaphor, etc. And there's usually someone who is good with punctuation or grammar or style. Rarely are comments duplicated, and if they are, then they add weight to whatever is being discussed. So while responses can be predictable at times, they're also dependable. I'm always astonished by the ways in which these multiple readings push me into deepening my revision process. I don't submit anything that hasn't gone through multiple and I do mean multiple, revisions. By the time the piece reaches my readers, it has been examined from every angle, and I can't find anything more to change. It's a surprise then when the comments start dribbling in, and I learn all of the things I've missed or overlooked in my own editing process. Without those extra eyes and minds, my work would remain incomplete rather than being enriched by the perspectives these readers bring. End quote.
Now, those are the pros, and we're going to do the pros and the negatives. I'm going to let Jan read the negatives, and then we're going to discuss all of this.
Okay, the negatives. Some readers are not sophisticated in their literary knowledge. Therefore, they often don't get it if the writer is experimenting, trying out a new approach to a genre. I've learned to recognize who these individuals are in my group and to read their comments discriminately, recognizing their limitations. In a similar vein, most of the critiques have been through a writing program and bring some of the problematic standardized workshop advice that can limit rather than literate a story. Show and don't tell is one approach. In certain instances, it's valid and helpful counseling, but at its worst, it becomes a blanket response to all writing. The reader not taking into account when the narrative is more attuned to the character's inner state than what is happening externally. Creating scenes also can fall into this trap. Sometimes a scene can vitalize a fading passage and dramatize what's happening, bringing conflict and tension into a piece. Other times, it's not appropriate. The greatest negative for me is when a writer in the group sends off a really early draft that he or she hasn't taken the time to hone him or herself. It's essentially a free write containing all of the original grammar and punctuation errors, the assumptions being that the messier the better, the more emotional or authentic. It's not. It's simply a very early draft that is difficult to read because of all the surface errors. Then I feel the writer is putting the responsibility on me to rescue this effort and to do the actual writing. I don't want to deal with early drafts because they are usually in the exploratory stage and haven't really congealed yet. The writer hasn't discovered the heart of the story and is relying on his or her readers to do that hard work for him or her. I resent being used in this way, but I also feel the responding too soon to an exploratory draft inhibits the writer itself, shutting down rather than opening up the possibilities.
Now, I would like to point out again that these are the pros and cons, written by Lily Iona Mackenzie. So we're going to discuss the pros and cons of what she wrote in just a minute. Again, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to James Kelly, and I'm the host of Aspects of Writing. My co-host for today's show is Janet Corsi and Stephen Murray, and our guests are S.H. Montgomery and Gregory A. Kompes. The topic is writers groups, good or bad. And Sue, you are the founder of a small writers group, so please tell us about it, how it got started, and how you might compare it to what we just heard.
Okay. Well, first of all, I don't agree with Ms. Mackenzie's take that the writers' workshops are not good.
Well, just tell us, how did you start your writers group?
Well, it was a stop and go for a while because two of the groups I started, the writers weren't serious,
Okay.
or they moved away. But I finally found the Super Six, and one of the writers that was in my group, there were two of us left, and he found another writer at a big group that meets here once a month,
Uh-huh.
and that was interested in a critique group. And from there, we brought in some other people and have been very serious writers.
Okay.
3 of us have already been published.
All right. And Greg, you're the former president of one of the largest writers groups in Nevada. What is your take on this subject? And Sue would definitely want to get your take on what we just talked about as well.
Yeah, in addition to the Henderson, I was the president of the Henderson Writers Group for 4 years, which just ended, my tenure just ended in May. And I also have 2 small private groups that I've started.
Okay.
I think writers groups are, in general, incredibly helpful. I think they provide not only help with your writing. We have, read and critique is great because you need feedback from people. And writing is so solitary, we often don't get feedback, or we get feedback from our loved ones who love us, so they're not as honest as they might be about problems or issues or conflict or plot things or things that don't work.
Right.
And a group of writers who are serious about writing help with that. We also have the option, the Henderson Writers Group is great because it's not just Writing 101, right? There are a lot of new writers there, which is a great opportunity to find community. But there are also many multi-published authors also in the group providing feedback. So you get this sort of village take on the writing process. And there's also socialization, which I think is really important, and networking, which is really important, and people to ask a question of as you're going through something. If you decide to indie publish, or if you decide to seek an agent, how do you write a query letter, those sort of things. The group helps with all of those things in a way that if you're on your own, you're on your own.
Well, I think this is an important thing to discuss. Now, Sue, I know you didn't agree with a lot about what Ms. McKenzie had stated when it comes to the negatives or the cons. What is your take on that? Because I think you've tried several writers groups. You started your
Right.
own, but you had also attended other writers groups as well,
Right,
large and small,
right.
right? So give us your take on this.
Well, everything Gregory said, I agree with, but I do think that a small group is good. The way we operate is we write at least 6 double-spaced pages to
Okay.
bring and give those to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that wrote it reads their work
Mm-hmm.
out loud, and people critique it as they go along.
Right.
And after the reading, then they discuss it.
Right.
And then return the pages, and sometimes the pages have more written on them than.
Well, I've sat in on your writers group, as a
Right.
guest, and one of the things I did observe, which was kind of interesting, is that, like you said, each person gets a copy of that critique or that work, and you critique it. I noticed that everyone, you're not just critiquing what the story is about, you're also critiquing for proper spelling or syntax.
We do some editing.
Right.
Yes.
So that kind of is interesting because I did notice that everyone's, even on the corrections, there's something that someone may have caught that someone else didn't, or they would have worded it a little bit different than someone else. So even when you take that away as the author, you still have to compile what you feel is the way you want to do it.
Exactly. I mean, you can take it with a grain of salt because, sometimes they say something needs to be expanded, or we've written something that's too much.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the writer has to decide if that's what they want to do.
Actually, the time I was there, I believe we were going over something you wrote.
Probably.
And
We
I-
each read. We all read.
What I found interesting is that someone found that, well, I think maybe your character should have done this. And this is what it was neat to me, is that you actually defended why you did it that way. Like, the reason why I'm going this way with this character, because keep in mind you're only reading segments of what you've
Correct.
written, is that later on in the story or whatever, I did it this way because later on this character is going to be doing this. So it helps a lot of ways. I can see where a small group would be great because it gives you a more intimate setting to where you really get to discuss the details of what you're trying to accomplish. And by trying to convince the other 4 or 5 people there what you're doing, it gives them a better insight of what you're doing. So, Greg, a take on that is, if you're in a larger writers group, how would you compare this?
Okay, so we do the Henderson Writers Group, anyway. I can't speak for every large writers group in the country, but the Henderson Writers Group does exactly the same thing. We have printouts, handouts that go out to the members, but some nights we have 25 or 30 people at our big Monday night meeting. So we also project the work onto a screen so people can read along, and we have critique sheets in case there aren't enough copies for everyone. Because the worst thing is giving someone a copy and getting no feedback on the printed copy. and then the reader reads and receives feedback and critique from the members in the room. One of the things that's different, and we try to maintain that sort of Iowa workshop concept, is the best option at that point is for the writer not to defend their work, to just listen to the critiques without defense at that point, because there's so many people who want to be able to contribute. But I also belong to two smaller groups with 4 or 5 members that we do exactly the same thing as Sue's group, where everyone reads, everyone provides feedback, and then we have a discussion, and it's more of a workshop session.
Right.
So you have 20 or 30 minutes to really break something down. And there are moments in that where members of my group know my novel so well. When I was working on Tamber Lane, for example, and workshopping that, they would say, Chris would never do that. Chris would never say that or would never do that. And it's an opportunity to sort of look at, well, why was that there? Oh, right. Okay, I was trying to accomplish something and it didn't work. And then your group catches that. I mean, it's great for punctuation and things to be caught. I'm big on parallel construction and themes, so I always point those things out. So the two groups offer a different set of experiences, and I think that's why a big group holds a purpose and a smaller group also holds a purpose. The other nice thing about a big group is if you're not ready to stand up in front of the room and read yet, you're in a position to sit in the room and hear critiques of others.
Okay.
And you learn from that. You learn so much by hearing other people's work critique, because invariably you're writing too, and you may have made a mistake with a parallel construction, or you might have made a verb choice, or you might have made a POV choice where you want to be in deep third and now you're an omniscient, and you're hearing that critique of other writers as you're working on your own work. And I think that feedback can be invaluable because you're being informed as a writer.
And Stephen, have you experienced both the group that you're in with Sue or the larger groups as well?
No, I've only been in the small group. The one with Sue was the first one that I was invited to be part of, and I'm a strong proponent. I agree with everything that's already been said. I think, especially for first-time writers and authors, a critique group or writers group is just invaluable. It certainly was for me, and my books wouldn't be anywhere were it not for the group that I was in. There's no question about it, none whatsoever. I would like to take issue with a couple of things respectfully that Ms. Mackenzie says, though, especially on the negative sides.
Okay.
And I say this respectfully. Her first negative, some readers are not sophisticated in their literary knowledge. I'm not too sure that that really matters. Everybody brings a different perspective to the table in a critique group or writers group, and I think that's what's important. They're readers as well, so
Well, I think
they're reading.
what you just said is important, because what can often happen, I think, from just being an outsider looking in to different groups that I've attended, is you can create a niche that you don't want to be too, I guess, pretentious about anything. So you want to make sure that you're open to anyone who's in the group, whether they have the educational background as Gregory sitting over there, or the educational background of me sitting right here,
Yeah.
the opposite end.
Or the experience of having written several
Right.
books. I mean, that's a
Right.
training and an education of its
Absolutely.
own.
Right. I find the more I write, the more educated I become.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's part of what you're saying, is that you can't just close your mind to just the fact, well, that wasn't that well written. Because when you were reading the negatives, Jen, I also picked up on that, and I thought, well, that's kind of not fair,
Well, and I think it's the other thing, too, where she says when people haven't fully developed something. Yes, the early draft aspect that she refers to, and she says that she feels that the onus is put on her to rectify it, and she feels that she's used. And I don't see it that way at all. Sometimes people
Right.
can bring early drafts. It doesn't matter. They're seeking help. And the nice thing about critique groups or writers groups is you're not under any obligation to take that person's suggestions or
yeah.
recommendations.
Nope.
You can take what you want out of it and discard what you don't like. Nobody's under an obligation to complete somebody's early
well,
draft.
and it's kind of like what Greg had said as well. If someone's bringing in a first draft, that gives you an opportunity to learn from the critique. Because when you do your first draft, you can say, oh, well, yeah, I remember this, so maybe I should do it this way. It actually benefits you in many ways.
Right.
Well,
We
well
also-
sometimes what's nice is when people, they bring an early draft and they listen to the group and they say, thanks for all your help, we're going to take it, and they take it away, and then they bring it back. That's
Right.
what's really nice,
Yeah.
is that you see the progression, and you see how the contributions of the group have really helped that.
Great.
Right. We had a member who was working on an opening of a novel that was part of a tsunami in India. And the first draft was kind of rough and it wasn't quite there. And then the group gave her feedback. And she brought that opening, I think, 4 or 5 times,
Sure.
reworking and reworking and reworking till she found the emotional stakes of the characters. And it was part of the process. And I think it teaches revision. You know, it's so interesting that this author would talk about how important revision is, and then be negative about the starting point, right? So it's the same thing you're saying. The idea that coming back again and again, because it's what we should be doing with our work. It's finding it again and
Precisely.
again and again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think another thing I'd like to point out, there is a difference between the smaller groups and the largest groups. The smaller groups are great for honing your skills, honing the book that you're working on, to make sure that when you get it to the final stages before it goes to editing, that you're not going to need that much. The great thing, I think, with the larger writers groups is, in addition to having that, it's not as one-on-one. So it's not as close niche to accomplish what you're trying to do. But the great thing is that you have other avenues to go out there when it comes to the publishing end of it, because you have all the resources, usually within a larger group. I know you do with the Las Vegas Writers Group. You have those resources where you can go to someone and say, where should I go for this, or where should I go for that? I think that's the biggest difference between the two, is there's not as much. I mean, I know your group, and I know you've honed those skills as well, but that's
Right.
within the last few years. But prior to that, but with the largest, Greg, am I correct on this or not?
Well, to a point. One thing I'll say about the larger group is that there's opportunity for other things. The Henderson Writers Group, we have a big Monday meeting. We get 25 to 30 people most Mondays. But we also have a Thursday afternoon meeting that's a smaller workshop group that's only about usually 12 people. And we do a Wednesday night critique group sometimes that's also a smaller group. So we get the best of both worlds with that. But there is a lot more. In the big group, there's the opportunity for a lot more networking and a lot more learning at a different scale. I think the groups accomplish very different things. You know, being in a small group really gets into the meat of the writing and the work of the writing and the craft of writing. The bigger group does some of that, absolutely, but it's also a great place for new writers being introduced to publishing and writing. We have a lot of seniors here. We have a lot of retirees here who've always wanted to write a book, and so a lot of them come to the meetings and participate at that level. It's also why the Henderson Writers Group puts on the Las Vegas Writers Conference every year, to bring agents and publishers and authors from all over the country to teach workshops and to have a different level of experience, right? We also bring in speakers who talk about all aspects of writing and life in general. The Las Vegas Writers Group does the same thing, but they don't have a critique aspect. It's a networking group with a speaker every month. I'll be speaking there in July. They use some local talent and bring some talent in from outside. But then they give you an opportunity to meet other writers and create smaller writers groups. So it's all this mush, I think, of
Yeah.
experience, right?
Yeah.
Right, Sue? I mean, that's been your experience, right? Trying new
Exactly.
things and trying new things and meeting
Exactly.
new people,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And some people work in the small group and some people don't.
That's right. And I think you have to be really serious when you're in a small group.
Absolutely.
And you also, we really require that everyone brings something to read that has written. And our group basically does that.
Right. And the nice thing about that is, as a writer, I think it holds your feet to the fire.
Yes.
We had a conversation before the show started about how we're not getting as much writing done as we want to be getting
Right.
done.
Right.
But when you're in a group that meets regularly and you have to show up with
You
your 6
have
or 8
to,
pages,
yeah.
you have to be writing.
That's right.
Is there any time, Sue or Stephen, when someone hasn't shown up at your group prepared to present something?
Yes.
There is. So what do you do in a case like that?
Well, they just listen and give their own critiques. We don't slap hands. I don't.
No, but I mean, do you move on to the next person? Does
Sure.
someone else come in with something?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
all of the attendees in the group, they all have to bring something.
Oh, that's
all
right.
read.
That's right.
Right.
I
We
remember
all-
now.
we all-
Everybody brings 6 pages. Oh, I
That's
remember
it.
that now.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
everybody's got.
So
like
you're never
half hour
without something.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And normally, if somebody can't bring something for whatever reason, they've been out of town, they'll notify us ahead of time they're coming. But unfortunately, they haven't written anything, and you know.
Okay,
what it
and
is.
so Greg, in the larger group, you're talking about 30 people. You couldn't possibly have all 30 people share something.
No, the Henderson Writers Group is roughly around 80 members, so it's not always the exact same 25 or 30 people
Right.
either. You contact usually the president. That's been the case in the past, or vice president to get on the reading list. There's usually 5 to 6 readers. We set a timer. It's a little different than the smaller groups where you have a little more workshop time. We set a timer. You get to read for 10 minutes, which is about 5 pages or 6 pages, depending on how fast you read it comfortably, and then you receive feedback for about 5 minutes, which is also why it's so important to have a printout so that because not everyone will get a chance to speak and give their verbal feedback so they can write on the thing. So it's a little bit different format, and not everybody gets to read every week as a rule.
Jan, have you ever belonged to a writers group?
No, I haven't. I was invited to join the Henderson Writing Group, but unfortunately, time with work and home, and writing, I just couldn't make the time.
Now, Stephen, you had a couple more things you'd like to say about on the cons part of this, I believe.
Well, I think that the smaller writers groups, I prefer the smaller writers group, having said that I haven't been to a large one. But the one thing I like about the small group is because we've had the same people, they actually follow the storyline and they're with you, and that they can legitimately turn around and say, this isn't how I've perceived the character from what you've written in the earlier chapters, which is the one nice thing that you do get. You get that continuity from the constant attendance of the 5 or 6 people in the group. But I do think the important thing is, too, the dynamics of the group is very important.
Yes.
It's very important, I think, to have people who are writing different genres, different styles, and people that can take constructive criticism and suggestions.
Which is the hardest part for authors.
Well, it is hard, but in so many cases, too, it's not what is said, it's how it's said.
Exactly.
It's how you phrase it. With the right dynamics, it should work very, very successfully. And if people are in a group or they try a group for the first time and it doesn't work for them, I don't think they should be put off by that. I think they should try another group because the dynamics are different.
Well, I would like
it's
to
very
add
important.
something to what Ms. McKenzie said when it comes to the cons. She had mentioned the fact that the writer is putting the responsibility on me to rescue this effort and do the actual writing regarding the grammar. And I think one of the things that maybe she missed in this is that it is so important because I don't care how many times you bring a piece to the writers group and you read it, somebody's going to find an error. And even when it gets to the editor, there are going to be mistakes that editor is going to send back, that you as the author are responsible for making sure that you catch it.
And I have had editors make mistakes as well.
Right,
Yes.
that's what I mean.
So nobody's perfect.
Right, so, it really is important, I feel. If I was going to be in a writer's group, I would want someone to catch those errors for me. I don't think it should be a burden to anyone. As a fellow member of that group, you would want to help that person,
Exactly.
strive to have the very best possible, knowledge.
You've hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
Right.
You've
Well,
hit the nail on the head.
when you're working, especially the big group, right, we work with a lot of new writers, and sometimes they don't have consistent verb tense. I mean, it really is
Right.
something new for them.
Right.
So, of course, you're going to help them with their grammar and point that out and point them in the right direction because you want them to become the best writer they can be. And it's a growth process. Everyone reads Hemingway or reads Virginia Woolf and thinks, I want to write like that. And then when they don't on their first draft, they're crushed. And the truth is, anyone who's written a novel or 2 novels or 3 novels knows it doesn't come out freshly formed, fully formed, that we have to work through the process. And that means from the beginning oftentimes. So.
Well, and that's, I hate doing it, and I know, Sue, you hate doing it, and I'm sure everyone sitting at this table hates doing it. But you have to keep reading your book over and over and over again. Every time it goes through a revision or an editing, it's up to you to go and read it again. And I'm as guilty as anyone else of not paying attention to it. In the past, it was because of lack of knowledge, not knowing what to look for or the proper syntax or the correct spelling. Thank goodness for word processing today.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It saves me. And even then, Stephen's correcting a lot of the stuff I write.
Well, the spelling isn't always the one you want either. You have to know.
Well, right, because, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, that's something that we all have to look for and not be afraid of. It's like what you were saying a while ago about, you can't take it personally. It's there. Everyone's there to help you achieve your goal.
Yes.
And I think that's the
Right.
hardest part is we take it to heart. Like, oh, why is he attacking me?
Right, but it's also, sometimes, a lot of times, the advice you get is not good advice
Well,
for
that's
your
true, too.
story. It
Yeah.
may be good advice for a different type of story, but it's not necessarily good advice for your story. We laugh about it a little bit in our writers group, but we have one gentleman who loves omniscient and thinks everything should be on omniscient, and we have another gentleman who hates first person, so he doesn't believe anything should ever be in first person. So they give you comments and feedback about that, and it's like, well, it's too bad. I'm writing this story in first person, so but it's that kind of advice. You have to know that person is that way. One person likes the Oxford comma and one person doesn't. I root for the Oxford comma, but so you make choices, and if when you get feedback from this person, it's going to include taking out every Oxford comma. When you get advice from this person, it's going to include putting in every Oxford comma. Those little things. I mean, that happens on the bigger scale too, and you just have to accept that. Oh, I'm going to take their advice about character, but not about grammar.
But what's interesting, what you're just saying, Gregory, is that when I approach an editor, I write in the first person, and I've actually had a couple editors who didn't want to edit my book because they don't edit in the first person.
Right.
And then we share one. What am I trying to say here? A person who's editing it, an editor. There we go. Getting old. We share an editor, and she was willing to take it on, even though she really doesn't, correct first-person books. But she said, let me give it a try. And I admire someone saying, I've never done this, but I'm willing to do it. Because it probably, when it comes to the editing process, because you brought this up about first person, I'm sure it's a lot different.
It's the hardest.
A mindset.
I think it's the hardest writing style ever.
Definitely.
It's the hardest of all of them. So so you need an editor who gets it,
right?
So that they can work, or who's willing to figure it out, so they can really work with you.
Yeah. All right. And so, Gregory, what was your experience like being the president of the? I'm just curious.
Oh, I loved it. The fact that I'm no longer president was a choice. It's a lot of work and a lot of effort. It's a big group. The Henderson Writers Group does a lot. We have 3 meetings a week around town. We put on the Las Vegas Writers Conference. We bring in speakers, and we do other writing workshops, and we're filing for grants from the state, and there's a lot going on all the time for our group. So it takes a lot of energy. But I certainly loved getting to do it, and I loved getting to play. I became president while I was working on my master's degree, my MFA in creative writing, and so I got to also try some new things and play with some things because the group was willing to do that. We started a book club, and we started a writing prompt night, and we tried a poetry night, which was great for a while, and then it didn't work, so we did something else. The group is flexible and trying new things and trying to please its members, and I loved getting to do that, and I loved getting to guide that. I love giving feedback and critique. I've been told I'm very good at it. So all in all, it was a very good experience. It takes a bit of time and effort to organize and do things, from building websites to running meetings to getting promotion. But it isn't alone. I mean, I wasn't the only one doing it. We have a whole board of people doing publicity and marketing and grants, and a treasurer who handles money.
What is
and
the
things,
conference,
so.
the Writers Conference, about?
So the Las Vegas Writers Conference has been around for, I think, 14 years now. They missed one along the way, but it is a 3-day. We turned it into a 4-day this year with an add-on day with Donald Moss, which was fabulous. If you know Donald Moss's work, talk about a mentor. I've met him, but his books are a great way to learn writing, by the way. But basically, we put on 3 days of workshops. We bring in 15 to 20 faculty from all over the country. We try not to use locals during our conference. Not that we don't like locals, but we want to keep it fresh for the local audience. So, people can hear me speak all over town, so why put me on the faculty, right? I've been on the faculty, but why put me on the faculty, right? That was one of the changes I made as president, and we really embraced that. So we bring in agents and publishers, so you get to pitch your work. We teach people how to query. We teach our members how to write query letters and how to do elevator pitches and all the pieces of that puzzle. And then we bring in specialists like marketing specialists. We bring in self-publishing specialists. So for a full weekend, you get to attend a conference with this great faculty. And then we do something very few conferences do anymore because it's so expensive to do, is we feed everybody all weekend. So you can come and have lunch and you're sitting with the faculty. We ask our faculty to attend. We keep our conference small. It's capped at 150 people. So there's a level of intimacy where you get to have lunch with the faculty and dinner with the faculty. And then we do lots of cool panels and other things too. So it's a learning opportunity. And if I'm not sure where their website is at the moment, but it's it's only about $400 to attend, to receive all of that for 3 days, which is really great. It goes up to 5,
yeah.
but
Have you been? Sue?
I have been once.
Yeah.
Early on when I first moved here, it was good.
yeah.
Stephen, how about you?
No, I haven't
And
attended.
Sue, all right, Jan, you haven't. No.
I wasn't even aware of them happening, but not when, and has never.
Where do they normally hold that conference?
It's been at Sam's Town for the past 7 years, or
Okay.
10, almost 10 years now, actually. The way their ballroom is constructed, there's a big ballroom area for dining, and then there's 4 small rooms, and everything's contained in one space. So it becomes really intimate, and you get to know not just the faculty, but the other attendees, because we have people who are local, but we also have attendees this past April from South Africa and England and all over the country. And so you get a chance to meet people who are doing what you're doing. And I was conference coordinator for 2 years, many years ago, and it's a great event. It really is a great local event, and it's been selling out. This last past year, it sold out. So.
And to your knowledge, I'm sure they do this in other states as well.
Oh yeah.
Oh, there are lots of conferences. I attend conferences all over the country. It's a great way to learn. I don't think, no matter where you are in the publishing scale, attending a conference is a bad idea. The Southern Writers have several conferences a year. I went down to the Saints and Sinners Conference this past year in New Orleans, which was it's a gay and lesbian conference, and I got to meet some great icons. There are conferences all over the country. Writer's Digest always has a list at the back of, and the Shaw Guides as well has a list of conferences. I think writers should be attending conferences.
I think one of the things I attended early on, back in 1990, was it's not a writer's group per se, but they had these classes at Emory University you could take in the evening on creative writing, and it was hosted by authors. Some, and most of them were actually in the romance area, like Miss Holloway. But and they were very accomplished authors. I mean, the one lady had sold over 250,000 copies of her book. So and to me, it's not a true writers group. But what they did do is that every person attending, and there were 80 of us there, over the course of several weeks, everybody had to stand up and talk about their work. So it is kind of like a writers group. So I think even if you're not going to join as a writers group, if you can find these learning annexes or whatever, that might be another way of going out there and trying to see where you are with your work. Because I really didn't know what I was doing. Admittedly, still don't. But, I know more now than I did. So
The Iowa Writers Festival is a good place, too. I'm sure you've been.
I haven't been to the Iowa.
Oh, you haven't?
I haven't, no. And I haven't been to the Tucson Festival of Books either. So there's still more to do. There's
There's
many.
always more to do.
There's so many, yeah.
Well, how do you find out about them so that you can get
well,
to
you
them?
probably just go on the
Online?
internet.
Well, the internet, of course, but also Writer's Digest, right? You should be reading the trade books, right? The trade magazine. So Writer's Digest always has a list in the back of what's coming up with articles about what they do at the conferences. The Shaw Guides, which is free online. It's a great place to go search for not just actually writers' conferences, but all kinds of events. Poets and Writers always has a list. So there are some opportunities.
Good.
To attend, and then depending on your genre, the Romance Writers has a big conference every year that they move around the country, which is an amazing conference.
And
to
Stephen,
attend.
I know you've attended that one because I was at one of the romance things down at, I think it was the Golden Nugget that you were part of.
Yes, I didn't attend the whole conference though because it's some of it was during the week, and unfortunately I'm a working stiff, so I could only go on the Saturday, but I was part of that one, yes.
Now, I already know the answer to some of this, but what should we look for in trying to find a writers group, and is it different for each author? And who would like to tackle that first?
Well, it's definitely different for each author, I
Yeah.
think.
In what way is it different for each author?
Well, first of all, I think you have to find a group that you're compatible with the people
Uh-huh.
as well.
Especially in the
as,
smaller groups.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Even in the
exactly.
bigger groups, we
Oh,
have
really?
people walk in who our format's not quite right for them.
Right, and
You
you
know?
have to be serious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a couple of groups that I was in early on here, they weren't serious.
Right. I mean, you're very regimented in the way you do it. Like you said, everyone
Yeah.
comes prepared.
Right.
You start with this person and you go around the room, so everyone gets the same amount of time or attention. And like you said, everybody's being critiqued, and there's not a lot of silliness that goes on. It's serious.
Well,
you know.
we have our silly times.
Yeah, I also think, I mean, you have to try things out and see what's right. It's hard sometimes to actually find a small group because there's not a board somewhere as a rule, right? Because 4 or 5 people have
Sure.
gotten together and started a writers group. So you should try the bigger ones and see how it works. And then, you know, the Henderson Writers Group started just like a lot of groups. Joe Wilkins founded the group, who I know you've had on your show
Yes,
before,
yes.
and she was looking for other writers, and she put a small ad in one of the local papers, and 6 or 7 people showed up, and that was the start. And for a long time, there were just those between 6 and 10 people in the group as a small group trying to figure it out. The Romance Writers of Las Vegas also they meet once a month on a Saturday. I think it's the second or third Saturday. But a lot of the members from that group have formed their own groups. And sometimes you get into a group and it's not quite right. There's a little too much blood on the floor, perhaps, or something. That's one of our goals, is to have no blood on the floor in critiquing, especially in the big group. But if you can't find a group that already exists, then meet some writers and form a group.
Well,
of your
Stephen,
own.
I would like to hear what I know your story, but I'd like for you just to tell us how you became associated with Sue and how you ended up being in part of that group, because this will give the listener an idea of how this works.
Well, it was an accident, really. I had written a book, and I, like most first-time writers, they've got no idea where to go once they finish writing it. And I stumbled across the Writers of Las Vegas group that meets at the Tap House on Charleston. And I thought, I must go there one night, and maybe somebody there can help me tell me where to go to publish the book. And I logged in online using Meetup or something like that. And I attended that one meeting, and the next day I got an email from this gentleman called Eric, who was also part of Sue's group. And he said, "Would you like to join my critique group?" And I didn't know what a critique group was. That's how naive I was. And so I said, "Well, what does it do?" And he sent off the list of guidelines and how they operate. And I thought, "Oh, sure, that sounds fun." So that's how, and Eric and Sue, they'd formed their own group, and they met at Barnes & Noble at the time, and I went up to Barnes & Noble on Rainbow, and that's where I met Sue. And Eric left before I got there. So Sue was the sole survivor, if you will, of the group, and I joined up, and then a couple of the others then came.
But how did they join? How did they?
Well, they joined because there was another. I had written an autobiography, and I'd found another group too that had said, "You're interested in getting your biography published? Give us a call." And it was a writers group run by a lady called Rosemary Holmes Gull, and it was an 8-week session, and I pitched up at the 7th week. And so when it was all round about that time when I met Sue, and I called Rosemary Holmes Gull afterwards and said, "You know of anybody in your group who was serious, who's interested in joining a critique group?" And that's how the others came about. You know, they all sort of stumbled in from that.
And now
that
we
group.
and now we have one that was from one of my old groups. She had dropped out to work on her master's, and now she's back.
So it's kind of like what Greg was talking about, in that you really have to network.
Yeah.
That's why the larger groups are a benefit, it sounds like, because
Absolutely.
it's from those that you can start your smarter critique groups. So.
Right.
Well, the group where ours came from, that was just a writing class. It wasn't like the Henderson Writers Group that's ongoing. This lady, she just conducted a little 8-week class on writing and helping people who are interested in writing get started.
Mm-hmm.
They were all part of that
The
group.
nice thing about our group is we all are writing basically different things.
Right.
Yes.
We had a cookbook and poetry and fantasy, romance and murder,
Children's.
and children's now. So I mean,
Yes.
but it all seems to work for us.
Right,
Yeah,
that's a
that's-
big debate for a lot of groups. I know the Henderson Writers Group has the conversation every once in a while too about genre groups versus open groups, and the Henderson Writers Group is primarily an open group, but there have been some genre groups that have sort of spun off. It's great to get advice from all kinds of writers because we all see things differently. At the same time, there's an expectation in thriller, there's an expectation in romance that the novel accomplishes certain things. And not working with people who are romance writers when you're writing a romance can also be a deterrent because you're not getting the feedback from people who know what is required, because there's a contract, right? There's a contract between the writer and the reader of a romance novel or a thriller. So having a little bit of perspective from someone in your genre is also very helpful, I think.
But I think most of us writers read a lot,
Right.
so we have that whether we write in that genre or not. I think, at least, well, I can't speak for everyone, just myself.
Well, I have to tell you, this hour has gone fast. We're actually getting down to the last minute of the show, and it
Great.
seems like we just started.
Yeah.
So I'd like to thank our guest, Gregory Kompes,
Thank you.
and Susan, or
And
S.H. Montgomery,
And I'd like to thank you for having me.
and then Stephen being our guest co-host today, as well as Janet Coursey, our regular co-host.
Thank you,
and-
James.
Oh,
and
you're
thank
welcome.
the listeners for tuning in.
Yeah, and if you're interested, you can. This show will be uploaded to YouTube as soon as we finish. Well, maybe not as soon, but not too far after that. So just go to youtube.com/aspects of writing to see the show. We're just all sitting here in front of a mic, but hey.
Yeah.
So until next time, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, everyone, for being on the show.
Thank you,
Thank
James.
Thank you,
Thank you.
James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Aspects of Writing. We hope you will join us next week as we discuss every aspect of the writing industry. Until then, if you can dream it, you can write it.